Hi everyone, welcome back to our HistoPH family, where forgotten Filipino history finally comes alive. Today, we're diving deep into the 7 lost kingdoms of the Philippines. This civilization was erased, a story that rewrites everything we thought we knew about our beginnings. Before 1521, before any European ever stepped foot on these islands, the Philippines was home to sophisticated kingdoms, master navigators who crossed entire oceans, warriors so fierce that even Spanish conquistadors feared them, and traders who dealt with China, India, and the Arab world as equals. This wasn't some primitive backwater waiting to be civilized. This was a thriving, complex civilization with its own writing systems, legal codes, and incredible achievements. And yet, most of the world, including many Filipinos themselves, know almost nothing about it. Why? Because 333 years of Spanish colonization systematically erased this history. But we're about to bring it back. I'm going to spend the next half hour taking you to a world that existed 6, 7, 800 years ago. A world of gold-laden trade ships, tattooed warriors, powerful priestesses, and kingdoms that made emperors in China sit up and take notice. This is episode 1 of our 30-day journey into ancient Philippines. And I promise you, by the end of this, you'll never think about Philippine history the same way again. The geography of power. Let me set the stage. Close your eyes and imagine this. It's the year 1450. You're standing on the shores of Manila Bay. In front of you, the waters are crowded with ships, dozens of them. Balangays with their distinctive outriggers, Chinese junks with red sails, Malay trading vessels, even Arab dhows. The air smells of salt water, fish paste, and exotic spices. You hear a dozen languages being spoken: Tagalog, Old Malay, Chinese, Tamil, Arabic. Behind you rises the settlement of Tondo, not yet Manila. That name won't exist for another 100 years, but Tondo is already massive. Thousands of people live here. Bamboo and hardwood houses rise on stilts above the water. The palace of the Lakan, that's the ruler, sits on higher ground, its walls decorated with gold leaf that catches the morning sun. Smoke rises from hundreds of cooking fires. Children play in the shallows. Fishermen return with their catch. Merchants haggle over prices. This is the Philippines that existed before colonization. And Manila Bay, this was just one of dozens of major trading centers across the archipelago. The Philippines sits at one of history's most strategic locations. To the north, about 700 miles away, is Taiwan, and beyond that, China, the wealthiest empire on Earth. To the south are the Spice Islands, source of cloves, nutmeg, and mace worth more than gold in medieval markets. To the west is the Malay Peninsula, connecting to India and eventually the Arab world. To the east is the vast Pacific Ocean. Every merchant ship traveling between China and the Spice Islands had to pass through Philippine waters. Every trade wind, every monsoon current naturally pushed ships toward these islands. The Philippines wasn't on the edge of the world. It was at the center of maritime Southeast Asia. And the ancient Filipinos understood this. They didn't just live on these islands. They built an entire civilization around controlling and profiting from this strategic position. They became the middlemen of Asian trade, the brokers between empires, the masters of the sea routes that connected half the world. If you're amazed by our ancestors' story, the 7 lost kingdoms of the Philippines, this civilization was erased. Help us hit our 500-like goal. Drop a comment about your favorite fact and subscribe to join the HistoPH family. And don't forget to hype this video. The Laguna copper plate, a civilization revealed. Now, let me tell you about one of the most important archaeological discoveries in Philippine history. A discovery so significant that it completely changed everything we thought we knew about ancient Philippines. In 1989, a man was dredging sand from a creek near Laguna de Bay, just outside Manila. He found something unusual, a thin copper plate, heavily corroded, covered in strange markings. He didn't think much of it at first, but that copper plate was about to rewrite history. When scholars examined it, they realized they were holding something extraordinary. This was the Laguna copper plate inscription, or LCI for short, and it was dated to the year 900 CE. That's right, 900, more than 600 years before the Spanish arrived. The text was written in Old Malay, using a script derived from Sanskrit, and when they translated it, here's what they found. It was a legal document, specifically a certificate of debt forgiveness. A ruler named Jayadewa was releasing a man named Namwaran from a debt of 1 kati and 8 suwana, units of gold. The debt was being forgiven during the month of Waisaka, during a full moon, on a specific day of the Shaka calendar, a Hindu-Buddhist calendar system. But here's what makes this document absolutely mind-blowing. It mentions multiple rulers and places, not just one kingdom, but several: Tondo, Pila, Puliran, and Binwangan. It references a commander of the military named Ganasakti. It uses sophisticated legal language and follows proper bureaucratic procedures. Think about what this means. In the year 900 CE, when most of Europe was struggling through the Dark Ages, when Vikings were just beginning to raid England, when Baghdad was the greatest city in the Western world, the Philippines had a writing system based on Indic scripts, multiple organized kingdoms with formal rulers, a functioning legal system that included debt forgiveness procedures, a standardized calendar, military commanders with official titles, trade networks sophisticated enough to use standardized gold measurements, and a bureaucracy organized enough to produce official documents on copper plates. This wasn't a primitive society. This was a sophisticated, literate, organized civilization with complex political structures and international connections. The LCI proved something that colonial historians had denied for centuries. The Philippines had a rich, complex, documented history before European contact. The islands weren't a blank slate waiting to be written on. They were already filled with kingdoms, laws, trade, and culture. And here's the kicker. The LCI mentions that the ruler's commands should be made known to all, and that descendants should keep it in mind. This was a culture that valued documentation, legal precedent, and the recording of important events. They understood the importance of written records. They wanted their history preserved, which makes it all the more tragic that so much of that history was deliberately destroyed. The Kingdom of Tondo. Let's zoom in on one of the kingdoms mentioned in that copper plate, Tondo, because Tondo's story shows us exactly how powerful and sophisticated ancient Philippine kingdoms really were. By the 10th century, Tondo controlled the Pasig River Delta, one of the most valuable pieces of real estate in Southeast Asia. Why? Because that delta connects Manila Bay to Laguna de Bay, the largest lake in the Philippines. Any trade goods moving inland had to go through Tondo. Any merchants wanting to access the agricultural wealth of the interior plains had to deal with Tondo's rulers. Chinese historical records from the Song dynasty, that's the 10th to 13th centuries, mention Tondo repeatedly. They call it Dongdu, or sometimes Luzon, and they describe it as a major trading partner. Chinese merchants bought gold, pearls, cotton textiles, hardwood, beeswax, and exotic birds from Tondo. In return, they sold porcelain, silk, iron tools, and bronze goods. But Tondo wasn't just a passive trading post. Its rulers actively cultivated relationships with China's imperial court. They sent diplomatic missions, what the Chinese called tribute missions, to Beijing. These missions weren't really about paying tribute in the sense of submission. They were sophisticated diplomatic theater. Here's how it worked. A Philippine delegation would travel to China with exotic gifts, rare birds, gold crafts, pearls. They would perform the required rituals, kowtowing to the emperor and presenting their tribute. In return, the Chinese emperor would shower them with gifts worth far more than what they brought: gold, silk, trade permits, official recognition. Both sides knew this was really about trade and diplomacy, not submission. The Philippines got valuable Chinese goods and official recognition that boosted their prestige back home. China got to maintain the fiction that it was the center of the world, with tributary kingdoms acknowledging its supremacy. Everyone won. Chinese records from 1001 CE mention an embassy from Tondo. The Songshi, the official history of the Song dynasty, records that in 1003, the ruler of Luzon sent an envoy named Li Han bearing gifts. In return, the Song emperor granted him an official title and gave him return gifts of silk and silver. This happened repeatedly throughout the 11th, 12th, and 13th centuries. Tondo maintained regular diplomatic contact with China for over 200 years. Think about that level of sustained international engagement. But Tondo's influence extended far beyond China trade. Archaeological excavations around Manila Bay have uncovered artifacts from across maritime Asia. There's porcelain from China, yes, but also glass beads from India, gold jewelry made in Southeast Asian styles, bronze items from Vietnam, and even a few pieces of Middle Eastern glassware. Tondo was cosmopolitan, a true international city where merchants from across Asia came to trade, where ideas mixed, where different religions and cultures coexisted. Think medieval Venice or Alexandria, but in Southeast Asia. The ruler of Tondo held the title Lakan, roughly equivalent to a king or Raja. Below him was a complex hierarchy of nobles called Maharlika, free commoners called Timawa, and at the bottom, Alipin, though Alipin is often mistranslated as slaves. Many Alipin were more like indentured servants who could own property, marry free people, and buy their freedom. The social system was stratified, but surprisingly fluid. Tondo also had a legal code called the Code of Kalantiao, though modern historians debate whether this specific code was authentic or a later creation. But what's not debatable is that ancient Philippine societies had legal codes. Spanish records from early colonization repeatedly mention that Filipinos had established laws and legal procedures that they followed consistently. One Spanish priest, Father Juan de Plasencia, documented the legal customs he found in pre-colonial communities around Tondo. These laws covered property rights, inheritance, debt, marriage, divorce, and crime. Punishments were usually fines paid in gold rather than physical punishment. There were formal procedures for settling disputes, usually involving community mediation. The maritime superpowers. Now let's talk about what really made ancient Philippines powerful: their absolute mastery of the sea. Ancient Filipinos were among history's greatest seafarers, and I'm not exaggerating. They built ships that could cross thousands of miles of open ocean. They navigated without compasses or maps, using the stars, wind patterns, ocean currents, bird behavior, and wave reading. They created trade networks that stretched from Japan to Java, from China to the Spice Islands. Their primary vessel was called the balangay, sometimes spelled barangay. These were outrigger boats ranging from 15 to 90 feet long. The largest ones could carry 60 to 90 people, plus cargo. They had removable bamboo outriggers for stability and triangular sails that could catch winds from almost any angle. Here's what made balangays extraordinary. They were built entirely without metal nails. The planks were fitted together using precise woodworking, then lashed together with fiber rope and wooden pegs. The joints were sealed with tree resin to make them watertight. This construction method made the ships flexible. They could bend and flex with the waves without breaking apart. European ships of the same era were rigid. In rough seas, their hulls could crack. But balangays, they rode the waves like dolphins. Spanish sailors who witnessed them admitted that balangays were better suited to Southeast Asian waters than European galleons. In 2009, Filipino maritime researchers built a full-sized replica of a balangay using traditional methods. They then sailed it from the Philippines to China, over 1,000 miles of open ocean, using only traditional navigation techniques. No GPS, no modern charts, no compass, just the stars and ocean knowledge passed down through generations, and they made it perfectly. This wasn't a primitive canoe. This was sophisticated maritime technology refined over thousands of years. Ancient Filipinos used these ships for everything. Fishing, obviously, island-to-island trade, long-distance trade expeditions, warfare, migration. There are accounts of Filipino traders sailing all the way to the Spice Islands, modern Maluku, to buy cloves and nutmeg directly from the source. That's over 1,500 miles of sailing through some of the world's most challenging waters. Spanish records mention seeing fleets of 40 to 50 balangays traveling together for trade or war. Imagine that, 50 outrigger vessels carrying hundreds of warriors and merchants sailing in formation across the South China Sea. That's naval power. The southern Philippines developed even larger ships called Lanong and Garay. These were massive war vessels used by the Islamic sultanates of Mindanao and Sulu. They could be over 100 feet long and carry 60 to 80 warriors plus crew. They mounted small cannons called lantaka on their bows. Spanish colonial records describe these ships with genuine fear. They were fast, maneuverable, and deadly in the hands of experienced Filipino captains. For nearly 300 years of Spanish colonization, the Sulu Sultanate used these vessels to raid Spanish settlements with impunity. The Spanish called them pirates, but from the Filipino Muslim perspective, they were freedom fighters, resisting colonial invasion. Their maritime supremacy was so complete that the Spanish never managed to fully control the Sulu Sea. Even today, that region is difficult for outsiders to control, a legacy of centuries of maritime resistance. the web of trade. Ancient Philippines wasn't just connected to Asian trade networks, it was one of the network's central nodes. Here's what the Philippines traded: gold, and lots of it. The archipelago had rich gold deposits, and Filipino craftsmen were master goldsmiths. They exported gold jewelry, gold leaf, and raw gold throughout Asia. Pearls from Sulu and Palawan, large, lustrous, highly prized in Chinese courts. Cotton textiles woven in the Visayas, fine enough to compete with Indian cloth. Hardwood timber, especially Lawan and Malawi. Beeswax for candle making and metalworking. Sea cucumbers, dried fish, and other maritime products for Chinese markets. Exotic birds, especially parrots, for wealthy collectors. Civet musk, which was used in perfumes. And slaves, let's be honest about this, captured in raids and sold to foreign markets. What did they import? Chinese porcelain and silk, iron tools and weapons from China and mainland Southeast Asia, spices from the Moluccas, Indian cotton cloth and dyes, bronze items from Vietnam, glass beads from India and the Middle East, rice during poor harvest years, and ideas, religious concepts, artistic styles, political models, technological innovations. This trade made some Filipino rulers spectacularly wealthy. Spanish accounts from the earliest days of colonization describe entering Filipino palaces and finding rooms filled with Chinese porcelain, silk curtains, gold ornaments, and imported luxury goods. One chronicler described a ruler's house where every dish was Chinese porcelain and the beds were covered with Chinese silk. The trade also created a merchant class that traveled widely. Ancient Filipinos established communities in places like Malacca, Brunei, and even in Chinese port cities. Chinese sources mention Filipino merchants living in Quanzhou and Guangzhou. These weren't just occasional visitors. They were resident communities that maintained their Filipino identity while engaging in long-distance trade. This international exposure had cultural effects. Filipino languages absorbed words from Chinese, Malay, Sanskrit, and Arabic. Religious ideas flowed along trade routes. Hinduism and Buddhism came from India and mainland Southeast Asia. Islam arrived via Arab and Malay traders starting in the 13th to 14th centuries. Filipino rulers adopted foreign titles when it suited them. Raja from Sanskrit, Sultan from Arabic, Lakan from native roots. But here's what's crucial. Filipinos didn't just passively absorb foreign influence. They adapted and transformed everything to fit their own culture. Islam in Mindanao and Sulu developed differently than in Arabia or even in neighboring Malaysia, incorporating local spirits and customs. Filipino goldwork borrowed techniques from Indian and Chinese craftsmen, but developed a distinctive style. Political structures borrowed from Malay kingdoms, but retained uniquely Filipino characteristics. The Hindu-Buddhist legacy. Before Islam arrived in the 14th century, much of the Philippines was influenced by Hinduism and Buddhism, though calling it Hindu-Buddhist might be misleading, because ancient Filipinos practiced these religions in distinctly Filipino ways. The evidence is everywhere once you know where to look. The Laguna copperplate uses Sanskrit terms and refers to Hindu months and deities. Archaeological sites in Butuan, Cebu, and Agusan have yielded Hindu and Buddhist statues, a golden Tara figure, a bronze Buddha, Garuda images. Spanish chroniclers recorded that when they arrived, they found Filipinos wearing Sanskrit-derived amulets and performing rituals with Hindu elements. Ancient Filipinos called their supreme deity Bathala, a word derived from the Sanskrit Batara, meaning lord or deity. Many ancient Filipino words for abstract concepts come from Sanskrit. Alam, knowledge, from alam; dukkha, suffering, from dukkha; guru, teacher, from guru. But ancient Filipinos didn't simply adopt Indian religion wholesale. They fused Hindu-Buddhist concepts with their indigenous animist beliefs. They worshipped Bathala alongside nature spirits called Anito or Diwata. These terms also have Sanskrit roots. They believed in karma-like concepts of cosmic balance, but interpreted them through local cultural frameworks. The Babaylans, spiritual leaders, usually women, acted as intermediaries between the human and spirit worlds. They performed healing rituals, communed with ancestors, advised rulers, and presided over important ceremonies. When Buddhism and Hinduism arrived, Babaylans didn't disappear. They incorporated some of these new ideas into their practices while maintaining their traditional role. This religious flexibility would later help some Filipinos adapt to Islam and Christianity, but it also meant that pre-colonial Filipino religion was complex and varied, different from island to island, kingdom to kingdom, even village to village. If you want a dedicated video on every kingdom, full documentary type, comment the kingdom name like Bhutan, Tondo, then comment Tondo. I read every comment.